Hello, and welcome to another episode of Real World Analytics, or What Schools Don't Teach You. This is the first installment of my Kaggle series because for the first time I've decided to enter a Kaggle competition, and I'm going to spend today's video talking about that. Now, the competition I'm entering is the 2018 Kaggle Machine Learning and Data Science Survey Challenge. I'll put a copy of it here. There'll be a link to it in the description below. It's a very good read, and I encourage you to go and check it out. Also, in addition to the general overview, there is a list of kernels. These are other people's stories that have been published and made public on Kaggle. So it's a very good introduction and to help guide your thoughts about what things are being looked at and seek some inspiration. Of course, in order to win the prize, it needs to be public, so there's incentive for people to share. One of the ones I've really enjoyed is What We Do in the Kernels, a Kaggle survey story by Heads or Tails. So thank you, Heads or Tails, for writing this up. They've got a lot of high-level cuts of the data. So we get this nice map where we can see most of the survey respondents are from the United States and India. We get a word cloud because why not? And then a bunch of GG plots as they've cut things one way or the other. Age by gender, age groups, and then countries. Now, personally, I'm going to be digging into the country aspect. And the reason why is because I was invited to the Asia Pacific Community Summit on Machine Learning and Data Science in Seoul. And there I met a lot of community leaders from Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam, etc. A lot of community leaders from Southeast Asia. And I was really impressed by the drive to have data science and this in the Asia Pacific region. So that's going to be my focus. But going back to the overview, it's quite interesting because they say that the focus is deliberately undefined, that they want you to find some story in the data, and that story could be something very macro. And they give the example of people who program in Python. I'm going to be looking at it from a national point of view, but then they say you could take a very fine subset of the population, giving the example of female data science students studying machine learning in master's programs. So because it's ill-defined, and I recognize that, and they recognize that, I'm going to be using different tools than I would if they said, right, give me distributions by country and tell us something interesting. That's my decision, not theirs. The reality is then when you do this, or any of the other kernels that are made public currently, they're going to do things slightly differently. Extending upon that, the people at Kaggle who will be evaluating this probably have their own biases and their own things they're going to want to see, and I want to be able to start a discussion with them rather than just do the analysis that I think is important and then try to persuade them that I know the best. So going down, if we look at the evaluation methods, there's the composition. Is it clearly written? There's originality. Does the reader learn something from the submission? Is there something novel? It should be informative, thought-provoking, and fresh all at the same time. And to that, as a consultant, I would add that I want to also include some actions. So I don't just want to say, hey, look, there's this pocket of data science people in the community that is very different from the average, but rather I want to say there's this pocket that's very different, or here's something surprising in the data. And because of that, what I recommend you to do is to something. I'll give examples later. And then the documentation. Are your code kernel data sources documented so the reader can understand what you did? Are your sources cited? And it should be clear at each step so that it's easy to follow and the process is reproducible. Now, this is where I'm going to lose. I'll put it out there immediately. And this is the point that I want to make about my view of the data science community and my view of data science work in general. So I'll cover that soon, but keep that in mind. There are cash prizes for the best stories. So there's a good incentive to participate. If you've never participated in a Kaggle competition, by all means, I think you should. Feel free to fork my code. It'll be on GitHub. There'll be a link in the description. So feel free to have a go. Why not? So if we look at my code, it's in our markdown. This is the HTML rendering of my code. It does some of the basic things that you would expect. I've got the summary here with the objective to clearly say this is what I'm doing. And I want to do three main things. I want to demonstrate an interactive approach for ill-defined analytics because I know that there's no real particular group I'm looking for, so I'm going to need to do some searching to find it. Adaptive documentation for usage with that interactive approach. That'll be covered in a future video. And then argue for a global view of analytics and data science, which is kind of my take on things based on the data I've seen so far. So going down through the R code, loading the data was the probably single biggest piece of the code in terms of typing. But now because I'm using R Markdown and I can do that with Shiny, I can do things interactively. And that is to say, here I have a country by gender. Now it's a little annoying that there are so many countries because it doesn't show up well on my graph. It's excellent that there are this many countries participating with more than 50 respondents each, but it doesn't show up well on the graph. So I have that by absolute number, by percentage, and we can see there's a lot of variation about how many or what percentage of respondents to the survey identified as female in the kind of pink color. In particular, this one here seems to be winning. And then there's a data frame or a data table, so that if there are any questions about, well, what are some of these, you can go into the data and look. So now I'm interested in country, as I've mentioned, and here I've cut it by gender, but you may want to cut it by something else. So you may say, well, yes, but what is the age distribution like in all of these countries? I can start to do that in real time within the document itself. So because I need to look for this segment or segments, I want to go through and make it very easy for myself to look at things, look at the graph, and see if things are interesting. So here there seems to be a lot more 35 to 39 in that country. And again, if there's something specific that I want to look at, I can go down to the data table and have a look. And in particular, if I want to look at my home country, not native country, but home country of Australia, I can go through there and see that we're a little bit older, 30 to 34, 25 to 29, whereas 18 to 21, that's it, 18 to 21, yeah. 18 to 21 and young 20s aren't as prevalent as they are in the rest of the world. So we're older here in Australia, and that's not interesting to me, but if it's interesting to you, you should be able to take that data and start running with it. So this is what I mean by the interactive approach to doing analytics and documentation, because the situation I don't want to be in is I don't want to go and do all of this myself, write it all up in a report and submit it. If you are a student at a university or an online class, that's probably your status quo. You're given an assignment to do some analysis. You do the analysis in a vacuum, effectively, and then you submit it to your teacher and they grade it. And if they like what you did, you do well. And if they didn't like what you did, even if everything was fine, you do poorly. Now, and as a consultant role, to me, that's death. I don't want that type of job because there's too much risk involved. The reality is, as a consultant, I'm probably the only person working with my project lead, or me and my team are the only people working with the project lead, and we're going to have weekly meetings. And so at one of those weekly meetings, I can take them something like this and say, this is something I find interesting. Do you find it interesting? If not, okay, what do you find interesting? How can we split the data? What interests you? Are you interested not in country because it's an Australian country? Are you interested in age distributions? Now, cutting age by age isn't going to tell us much, but it does give us the overall numbers. Are you interested in what their primary online platform they use? Is that what interests you? Because if you're looking at moving into using some platform, you may want to know what age groups are doing that. Unfortunately, because the survey is long, as you get into later and later numbers, you get more and more not answered. You get more and more blanks. But from the table, we can go through and see who prefers what online platform. So I can very quickly do this with my project sponsor and try to close a feedback loop. Because if I've just done everything by country, and in fact they're not interested in country, I want to find that out as soon as possible. I don't want to be at the end of the project and find out that everything's not what the customer wants. If you're a student, you can start doing this. If you have an assignment and you are looking at the data, this may seem a bit odd, but you can go to your teacher's office hours and discuss this with them. Again, you need to come with something. When I was teaching, if someone came and said, yeah, so what should I do? I wouldn't have much time for them. But if they came with, hey, this is the outline, these are the types of things I'm seeing with the data, is this something that interests you? Do you have any feedback for me? That's a lot easier to start the conversation. So I was saying that I am looking at country, and in particular I split country by gender, and I got something like this. And you see there's this one country that's pretty far ahead in terms of the percentage of female respondents, and that's Tunisia, with about 31% of the respondents being female. Now, the first observation is that's still a far cry from 50, but I found it interesting because looking through these, the first four are Muslim majority countries, being Tunisia, Malaysia, Morocco, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. The US is next with a lot more respondents, but the next one is Egypt. So 3 of the top 6 are in Northern Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, and Egypt. And I found this really interesting because in a lot of the West, there's this narrative that conditions for women in Muslim majority countries aren't the best. And I'm not saying that they're not hard. Perhaps that if you are a data scientist in the Muslim world, you are more outspoken as a woman and more likely to do the survey. And so there's a survey bias here. I don't know, but I find it interesting. Maybe that these numbers are low, that in Tunisia there are 23 female respondents, or respondents identifying as female, for 31%. So the numbers are small. But now I can start to have the conversation, well, if 23 is too small of a number, how many is enough of a number? And I can really pare down this chart to look at some of these things. But yeah, so looking at this, if I were with Kaggle, I would try to do more outreach for the Muslim world, and in particular, getting women data scientists in the Muslim world, because it seems like they have peers and they would have future mentors. And so that's a kind of concrete recommendation that I can make to either start having stronger outreach or to do follow-up studies, maybe look at the internal Kaggle data to see if something like this holds. So what do you think? Is this an approach that you can get on board with? Do you like the idea of being able to very simply play around with your variables and cut things very loosely? In future videos, I'm going to be talking about cutting this more finely and doing some more customized tools about it. And you may think that that looks just like some very simplistic BI tool, that Tableau or ClickView or Power BI can do that a lot better. Yes, but I'll get more information about why I prefer doing it this way later. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Again, the code will be available on GitHub. Feel free to take it, fork it, play with it, whatever you'd like. You will need to download the data from Kaggle and be running R with Shiny and some of the other packages. If you have any questions, please ask. Thank you for watching.